Ethan was just an ordinary human, working on a space station far from Earth. The station was in a quiet part of space where very few people lived. Ethan had always liked it this way, far from the busy cities and crowded planets. He worked as a freelance technician, fixing old equipment and making sure everything was running smoothly. One day, while on a routine mission to repair a satellite dish, Ethan noticed something strange. There was a figure standing near one of the outer docking bays. It was a woman, but not just any woman. Her skin was a pale blue with a soft glow, and her hair shimmered in shades of silver and gold. Her clothes were tattered, and she looked weak, like she hadn't had food or water for days. Ethan's first instinct was to walk away. He wasn't used to encountering strangers, especially not someone who looked so different. But something about her made him stop. Her eyes were filled with fear, and there was a look of desperation on her face. Ethan hesitated, unsure of what to do. Double quotes, please. Help me, she said, her voice trembling. Ethan frowned, unsure if he should get involved. Who are you? He asked, his voice cautious. The woman staggered forward, her knees shaking as if she was about to collapse. I'm Lyra, she whispered. I need your help. Ethan studied her carefully. She didn't look dangerous, but he had been trained to be cautious. The station was in a part of space known for its lawlessness, and it wasn't uncommon for criminals to hide in the shadows. Why are you here? Ethan asked. You're far from any known colony. What do you want? Lyra took a deep breath, gathering her strength. I'm running from the cartel, she said, her voice breaking. They're after me, and I don't have anywhere to go. Please, I beg you, let me stay here, even if just for a while. I'll do anything. Ethan raised an eyebrow still. Unsure? The cartel? What do they want with you? Lyra's eyes flickered with fear. She looked over her shoulders as if she expected someone to appear. My family. My family controls resources that the cartel wants. I think I know something. That could make them even more powerful. I don't have much choice. Please, I need your help. If you let me stay, I will serve you. I will do anything you ask. Ethan took a step back. He had never been one for saving strangers, especially ones claiming to be pursued by dangerous people. But there was something in her eyes that made it hard to say no. He could see she wasn't lying. Why me? Ethan asked. Why not go to someone else? Why come to a place like this? Lyra looked at him, her eyes full of sorrow. I had no choice. You're the only one who could help me. I know what you do. Here repairing things, keeping things working. I have nothing left. I have no home. No family, nothing but a life on the run. Ethan paused, knew the dangers of getting involved with someone in trouble. But he also couldn't ignore the look of desperation on her face. I'm not a soldier or a hero, he said quietly. It just fixed things, that's all. Lyra took a step forward, her eyes pleading. I'll serve you, I promise. I can help. You with things, whatever you need. Just please don't turn me away. I'll be your servant, your helper. Just please, don't leave me out here. Ethan stood there, unsure of what to do. He had never been in a situation like this before. A woman, an alien asking him to take her in as a servant. The idea was strange, but her need was so real, and he could see she was being sincere. All right, Ethan finally said, his voice soft but firm. You can stay. Don't expect anything more than that. I don't know what you're involved in, but I won't get mixed up in it. You'll help me with repairs, and I'll make sure you stay safe. Lyra's face softened, and for the first time, she gave him a smile, faint but real. Thank you, she whispered. You won't regret it. Ethan led her into the station. Still feeling uneasy about the situation, but there was something about her that made him feel he had made the right choice, even though he wasn't sure why. As they walked through the quiet hallways of the station, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this decision might change everything for both of them. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: the story of Lyra, the desperate alien beauty, had just begun. Lyra followed Ethan through the dimly lit corridors of the space station, trying to keep her steps steady despite her exhaustion Her body was still weak from days of travel and fear, but she didn't dare show it. Ethan had offered her shelter, but she had to prove herself worthy of his trust. As they walked, Ethan kept glancing at her. He couldn't help but notice how different she was from the people he knew. Lyra was an alien, yes, but there was something in her eyes that seemed so ... human. She wasn't like the cold, calculating beings he had heard about in stories. She was vulnerable, desperate. And yet there was a strange strength about her that made Ethan feel both curious and protective. They reached the small living quarters Ethan had set up for himself. It wasn't much, just a bed, a table, and a few tools scattered around, but it was enough. He gestured toward the bed. "You can rest here for now," Ethan said, his voice soft but firm. "I'll get you something to eat. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." Lyra nodded, her eyes grateful but still wary. She sat down on the bed, her hands resting on her lap as she watched him. She didn't speak, not yet. She knew she had to be careful with her words. Ethan quickly left the room to prepare something from the small supplies he had. Lyra sat quietly, her thoughts racing. She had never expected to find someone like Ethan. Most humans would have turned her away without a second thought, yet here he was, offering her shelter. It wasn't much, but it was something. She hadn't had in a long time. As Ethan returned with a simple meal of ration packs, he noticed the way Lyra was watching him. There was a look in her eyes that seemed to be both thankful and conflicted. He set the food down in front of her. "Eat," he said. "You'll feel better." Lyra hesitated for a moment before she picked up the food. She had been hungry for so long, but it wasn't the food that was bothering her. It was the promise she had made. The promise to serve him. She wasn't used to this, being so vulnerable, being at someone else's mercy. But there was something about Ethan that made her feel safe. It wasn't like the men from her past, the ones who had only wanted to use her for their own gain. He was different. As she ate, Ethan sat across from her, watching her carefully. He still didn't fully trust her, but he could see that she was genuine. She wasn't asking for much, just shelter, a place to stay. And yet, she was offering herself to him in a way he hadn't expected. "I still don't understand," Ethan said after a moment, breaking the silence. "Why would you want to be a servant? You're an alien. You should be in a position of power." "Not I know," Lyra interrupted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't have a choice. The cartel. They're after me. They want to control me. Control everything I have. I don't have a home. I don't have an empire anymore. I'm nothing." Ethan frowned, unsure of how to respond. He had no idea what it was like to lose everything. His life on Earth had been simple. He worked hard, fixed things, and stayed out of trouble. But now, things were different. He was getting involved in something much bigger than himself, and he didn't know if he was ready for it. "Why me?" he asked again. "Why not someone else?" Lyra set down her food and looked directly into his eyes. "Because you're different. You don't want anything from me. You've helped me already, even though you don't know me. I don't want to be a servant, but I have no choice. I can't fight the cartel, but I can do things for you, help you. I can prove that I'm not a burden." Ethan looked at her for a long time, unsure of what to say. He had never thought of himself as someone who could help someone like Lyra. She was beautiful, powerful in her own way, and yet here she was, asking him for protection. He wasn't a hero, just a simple technician. But there was something in her eyes, something that made him want to help her. "All right," he finally said, breaking the silence. "You can stay, but I won't treat you like a servant. I'm not. You're a master, but if you want to help, you can. I'll show you how to fix things around here." Lyra's eyes widened in surprise, and then, for the first time since they had met, she smiled. It wasn't a big smile, but it was enough to make Ethan feel like he had made the right choice. "I'll help," she said softly. "Thank you. I promise I won't be a burden." Ethan nodded, though he still had doubts. He wasn't sure what to expect from Lyra, or what her presence would mean for his future. But he knew one thing for sure. His life was about to change. And he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. As Lyra finished her meal, Ethan looked out the small window of his quarters. The stars twinkled in the distance, far away from the dangers they had just escaped. He wondered how long they could hide. From the cartel, more importantly, he wondered what it would mean for both of them if they were caught. But for now, all he could do was take it one step at a time, helping Lyra in any way he could. The days passed slowly aboard the space station. Ethan worked on his usual repairs, and Lyra, true to her word, helped him whenever she could. She was quick to learn, and despite her delicate appearance, she proved to be surprisingly strong. She could fix machines, assist with technical tasks, and even help maintain the station's energy systems. At first, Ethan was still cautious. He kept his distance, unsure of the real reason she had asked to stay with him. Was it out of desperation, or was there something more? But as time went on, he found himself growing more comfortable with her presence. She wasn't just a servant, she was a partner. In a strange way, Lyra, for her part, was focused on earning Ethan's trust. She had never imagined herself in such a position. She had always been someone with a purpose, with power and influence. Now, she was simply a woman who had lost everything, and she had no choice but to find a new way to survive. One morning, as they worked together in the control room, Lyra spoke up, her voice steady, but filled with a hint of uncertainty. "I know. You don't want me to be your servant, Ethan," she said, glancing at him. "But I want to help you more. I need to prove myself to you. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to just fix things around here. I can do more." Ethan looked up from his work. He had expected her to ask about something more than just fixing things. But he had been waiting for this moment, unsure of what she would say. "I don't know what you mean," he said slowly. "Never asked you to do anything, just needed help with the station." Lyra hesitated, biting her lip. "I know, but I've been thinking. Maybe I can help you in ways that go beyond just fixing machines. Maybe I can teach you something that could protect both of us." Ethan raised an eyebrow, unsure of where she was going with this. "Teach me? Teach me what?" Lyra took a deep breath. "I was trained in the ways of diplomacy and strategy. I was once part of an empire, a family that controlled vast resources. I know things that could help us if we're ever in danger. If the cartel comes for us, I can teach you how to protect yourself, how to survive in a galaxy that doesn't care about people like us." Ethan stood still for a moment, absorbing her words. He hadn't expected this kind of offer. He was just a technician, not someone who had ever thought about survival in such a harsh and unforgiving universe. "I'm not a fighter," Ethan said, his voice uncertain. "I don't know anything about what you're talking about. I just fix things." Lyra nodded. "Understand. But we're in a dangerous place, Ethan. The cartel won't stop until they find me. And I don't want to drag you into something that could destroy us both. But I can teach you how to protect yourself, how to make sure we're not caught off guard." Ethan thought about her words. He had never thought much about survival beyond fixing machines. He'd always been comfortable in his quiet, safe little corner of the galaxy. But now, with Lyra here, he realized that things had changed. "If you're serious about this, then fine," he said after a long pause. "I'll listen to what you have to say, but no promises. I'm not some soldier." Lyra smiled faintly, the corners of her lips lifting. "I don't need you to be a soldier. I just need you to be willing. To learn, the rest will come with time." Over the next few weeks, Lyra began teaching Ethan everything she knew. She taught him the basics of survival in a hostile galaxy, how to read the signs of danger, how to defend himself in hand-to-hand combat, and most importantly, how to read people and situations. Ethan was a quick learner, but he still felt out of his depth. He wasn't sure if he could ever truly understand the things Lyra had lived through, the struggles she had faced as part of a powerful family that had once controlled a vast empire. But he tried to absorb what she said, realizing that this knowledge could make the difference between life and death. As the days passed, Ethan started to see Lyra in a different light. She wasn't just some alien woman who had come to him for protection. She was strong, smart, and capable. She had a past filled with power and responsibility, and now she was here, offering him everything she knew. It was strange, but as they spent more time together, their bond grew stronger. Lyra was no longer just a woman asking for shelter. She was someone who had become a valuable partner. And in return, Ethan began to feel something for her that he hadn't expected. One evening, as they sat in the small living area of the station, Lyra looked at Ethan and spoke again. "You know, I never wanted to be in this position," she said softly. "I didn't want to be a servant. I didn't want to be powerless. But I've learned that sometimes we don't get to choose our path. Sometimes we have to make the best of what we have." Ethan nodded, understanding her words more than she might have realized. He wasn't sure what the future held for them, but he knew that they were no longer just two strangers thrown together by circumstance. They had become something more, a team. "I'm glad you're here," Ethan said quietly. Lyra smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Ethan. I won't let you down." And for the first time since she had arrived, Lyra allowed herself to relax, knowing that, for better or worse, they were in this together. The days on the station had become a routine. Ethan and Lyra worked side by side, fixing machines and maintaining the systems. They had settled into a strange kind of partnership, each relying on the other in different ways. Lyra had continued to teach Ethan about survival in the galaxy, while Ethan helped her learn more about human technology and the workings of the space station. But the calm was not to last. One evening, while Ethan was busy adjusting a control panel in the station's engine room, Lyra's sharp instincts caught something unusual. A faint signal flashed on the station's communication screens. It wasn't much, just a blip. But it was enough to send a wave of panic through her. She rushed to the communication console and activated it. "Ethan," she called out, her voice tense. "We need to talk. Now." Ethan glanced up from his work and saw the urgent look in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag before heading over to her. "I think the cartel has found us," she said, her voice low and steady, but Ethan could hear the hint of fear in it. "Are you sure?" Ethan asked, his heart beginning to race. He knew the cartel was dangerous, but hearing that they were coming after them made the threat feel real. Lyra nodded. "I've seen this signal before. It's a tracking beacon, and it's coming from a ship that's been following us. We have to prepare." Ethan swallowed hard. He had never been in a real fight. He had always been a technician, someone who fixed problems from the safety of his quiet station. But now, the problem was coming to them, and it wasn't something he could fix with tools. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. Lyra turned to him, her expression calm but firm. "We can't outrun them. They're too powerful. We need to defend ourselves." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. "I don't know how to fight," he said, his words almost a whisper. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've been learning. You can do this." She was right. Ethan had spent weeks learning the basics of self-defense, but this was different. It wasn't just training. It was real. They were in danger, and their lives were on the line. "Okay," Ethan said, taking a deep breath. "What do we do first?" Lyra quickly moved to a wall panel and began typing in commands. "We need to get the weapon systems online," she said. "There's a small defense system on this station. It won't hold off a full attack, but it'll buy us time." Ethan nodded and rushed to another terminal to help her. His hands were shaking, but he tried to stay focused. They didn't have much time. The station's small defense systems weren't meant for a prolonged battle, but if they could make the cartel think they were stronger than they were, they might have a chance to escape. As they worked together, the tension between them grew. Neither of them spoke much. They both knew what was coming. Lyra worked fast, her eyes scanning the screens, while Ethan tried to keep up. He had never been a soldier, but he was learning quickly how to act under pressure. Finally, the systems hummed to life. The weapons were online, but Ethan didn't feel any more at ease. The cartel ship would be close by, and their firepower was likely far superior to anything the station could muster. "We've done what we can," Lyra said, her voice steady. "Now we wait." Ethan's mind raced. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this. What if the cartel attacked too quickly? What if they couldn't defend the station? But then he looked at Lyra. She had been through so much already, and she had chosen to trust him. If she could do that, then maybe he could face this challenge. 2 minutes later, The cartel ship appeared on the station's sensors. It was large, much larger than the small station they were hiding on. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. As the ship moved closer, its weapon systems powering up. "They're here," Lyra said quietly. She didn't sound scared, but Ethan could hear the determination in her voice. "Get ready." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He could feel the weight of the situation on his shoulders. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for Lyra, for their survival. The first blast from the cartel ship hit the station's defense shield. The station shook, and alarms blared, warning of the damage to the system. Lyra quickly start. Ed adjusting the shield settings, trying to absorb the blast and keep the station intact. "We can't take many more hits like that," she said, her voice tense. "We need to act fast." Ethan looked at her, his heart racing. "What do we—" "Do stay calm," Lyra replied, her focus unwavering. "I'm going to hack into their ship's communication system. If I can disable their shields, we might have a chance." Ethan nodded, doing his best to keep his mind clear. He trusted Lyra, but this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. The cartel ship fired again, this time more forcefully, and the shields flickered under the pressure. Ethan could see the damage building, but Lyra didn't stop. She was typing furiously on the console, her fingers moving quickly across the keys. "I'm in," she said after a moment. "I've cut their communication lines. Now, we need to hit them with everything we have." Ethan ran to the weapons console, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no experience with this, but Lyra had taught him enough to understand what needed to be done. He activated the station's weapons system, firing a blast at the cartel ship's exposed hull. The blast hit its mark, and the cartel ship shuddered. But the battle was far from over. Ethan and Lyra knew they were in for a long fight. The cartel wouldn't stop easily. But for now, they had a chance. The battle with the cartel had been long and fierce. The station's shields had held up longer than expected, but the cartel ship had only intensified its attack. Ethan and Lyra had worked tirelessly, moving from one station to another, trying to keep the defense systems up and running. Lyra, despite her calm demeanor, was clearly exhausted. The stress of the battle was weighing heavily on her, but she pushed through it. Ethan had never seen her so focused, so determined. He had always known she was strong, but now he was seeing a different side of Hertha, a side of her that had survived the collapse of an empire and the pursuit of a ruthless cartel. "Ethan," Ada said, her voice strained. "We need to move. Fast. The cartel ship is weakening, but we don't have much time before they regroup. We need to disable their engines." Ethan nodded, his hand shaking slightly. He was tired too, but he didn't have time to think about it. There was a job to do, and they had to finish it. "What's the plan?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. Lyra turned to him, her expression serious. "Need to access their systems and reroute their energy supply. If I can overload their engines, they'll be forced to retreat. It's risky, but it's the only way." Ethan's heart raced. He had never done anything like this before, but he knew that Lyra was right. They had to act quickly or risk losing everything. "Okay, let's do it," he said, his voice firm. Together, they made their way to the communication bay, where they had set up a makeshift control center. Lyra began typing rapidly on the console, her fingers moving with practiced speed. Ethan stood beside her, watching the progress on the screen. "I'm in," Lyra said, her voice full of concentration. "I've accessed their engine room. Now I need to bypass their security systems." Ethan didn't fully understand all the technical details, but he trusted Lyra. She had been teaching him about technology for weeks, and he had learned enough to know that she knew what she was doing. As Lyra worked, Ethan couldn't help but think about how far they had come. When he had first met Lyra, he had been nothing more than a technician on a small space station, content with his quiet life. Now he was in the middle of a life-or-death struggle with an alien cartel, trying to help an alien woman rebuild her lost empire. He had never imagined anything like this. "Lyra," Ethan said, glancing nervously at the screen. What happens if they figure out what we're doing? Lyra didn't look up from her work. They'll try to stop us. But if we can overload their engines before they can react, we can disable their ship and force them to retreat. We just have to be quick. Ethan nodded, trying to steady his breathing. His hands were still shaking, but he had come this far. He couldn't back down now. The seconds seemed to drag by as Lyra worked her magic on the cartel ship's systems. Finally, she let out a quiet sigh of relief. "I've done it," she said, her voice low. "The engines are overloaded. We just need to fire the final blast, and they'll be forced to retreat." Ethan didn't hesitate. He activated the station's weapons, aiming at the cartel ship's engines. He could see the cartel ship on the monitors, its lights flickering as it struggled to maintain control. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice steady. "Make it count." Ethan fired, and the blast hit its target. The cartel ship shook violently as the engines exploded in a burst of light. The station rocked from the force of the blast, but the shields held. For a moment there was silence. Then, the cartel ship began to retreat, its engines failing as it limped away. No longer a threat. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The battle was over, and they had won. "We did it," he said, his voice full of disbelief. Lyra nodded, but her face was still serious. "This isn't over. We'll be back, and we won't be able to hide forever. We need to leave this place." Ethan looked at her, unsure of what she meant. "Leave? Where do we go?" Lyra turned to him, her eyes filled with determination. "We go to a place where we can rebuild. We need allies. We need to find a way to fight back, to take the cartel down once and for all." Ethan felt a pang of uncertainty. He had never been a fighter, and the idea of leaving everything behind, of venturing into the unknown, was frightening. But he knew Lyra was right. Cartel would be back, and they needed to be ready. "I'll go with you," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I don't know where this road will take us, but I'm not leaving you." Lyra looked at him, her expression softening. "Thank you, Ethan. I won't forget this. You've helped me more than you know." Ethan smiled, though the weight of what lay ahead hung heavy on his shoulders. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. Together, they would fight. Together, they would survive. The space station was quiet once again, the hum of the engines the only sound in the background. After the battle with the cartel ship, Ethan and Lyra had spent the next few days repairing the damage, securing their supplies, and making plans. Lyra's calm, determined presence had kept Ethan focused. But there was something she hadn't shared with him, something that had been weighing on her mind since their victory. Ethan had noticed the change in her. She had become more distant, less talkative, as if she were carrying a heavy burden. He had been too busy to ask, but now, as they sat together in the control room, couldn't ignore it any longer. "Lyra," Ethan began softly, his voice gentle. "You've been acting differently. Something's bothering you, and I can see it.
How?
What aren't you telling me?" Lyra looked at him, her gaze distant for a moment. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. It was clear she had been debating whether to tell him for some time. Finally, she sighed and leaned back in her chair, her eyes meeting his. "There's something you need to know," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's about who I am, or rather, who I was." Ethan listened carefully, sensing that this was the moment when everything would change. "I didn't tell you everything when we first met," Lyra continued. "I didn't want to. I didn't want you to see me as just another alien, someone with a past you couldn't understand, but you deserve to know." Ethan felt a growing curiosity. He had learned a lot about Lyra in the past weeks, how she had come from a powerful family, how she'd been hunted by the cartel, how she had tried to survive alone. But now it seemed she was finally ready to reveal the truth. "My family. We were royalty," Lyra said, her eyes darkening as she spoke. "We ruled an empire, an entire star system. It's my father, my mother, both leaders of the empire. We controlled resources that were vital to the galaxy.
Hey, but there
Was always danger, always enemies waiting to take everything from us." Ethan's heart raced. He had known that Lyra was from a powerful background, but this An Empire? It was more than he could have imagined. The cartel didn't just come after me, Lyra continued, her voice tightening. Yes, they came after my family. They wanted everything we had, and they were willing to destroy us to get it. They attacked our home, and they took it. My parents, ... they were killed in the attack. Ethan sat in stunned silence, trying to process her words. He had known that Lyra had lost a lot, but this? It was more than just a struggle for survival, it was the loss of an entire way of life. Why didn't you tell me this before? Ethan asked, his voice soft but full of concern. Why keep it a secret? Lyra paused, looking at the floor for a moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. Because I was afraid of being weak, afraid of you seeing me as just another victim. I didn't want anyone to feel sorry for me, especially you. I thought if I could prove myself to you, if I could help you, protect you, then maybe I could feel like I still had some control over my life. Ethan's heart went out to her. He had never thought of her as weak. In fact, it was the opposite. Lyra had shown him nothing but strength and resilience. Even when things seemed hopeless. You don't have to be afraid, Ethan said gently. I don't see you as weak. I see you as someone who's been through hell and is still standing. You don't have to prove anything to me. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Ethan. That means more to me than you know. But there was more to her story. Ethan could sense it. I've been running for so long, Ethan, she continued, her voice quieter now. I've been trying to outrun the cartel, trying to stay hidden. But I know that they won't stop. They won't stop until they have everything I once had, everything that belongs to me. And I can't keep running forever. I need to fight back. I need to take back what's mine. Ethan listened carefully, feeling the weight of her words. He'd never imagined being involved in something like this, but now he understood the true depth of the situation. Lyra wasn't just some survivor trying to make it through the galaxy. She was the last heir to an empire, and the cartel was hunting her down to take it all away. I don't know how to help you take it all back, Ethan said, his voice serious. But I'll be with you, whatever it takes. Lyra smiled at him, the faintest hint of hope in her eyes. I knew you would say that. That's why I trust you. Ethan could see the determination in her eyes. She had lost everything once, but she was not going to let it happen again. She was going to fight, and she wasn't going to do it alone. I'll help you, Ethan said firmly. We'll fight together. Lyra nodded, the weight of the past still heavy in her heart. But now, for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. They had made it this far, and with Ethan by her side. She was ready to face whatever came next. The stars outside the space station flickered softly, when for the first time in weeks there was a calmness in the air. Ethan and Lyra had worked together, rebuilding not only the station, but also the bond between them. They had faced threats from the cartel, fought side by side, and learned more about each other than either had expected. But now, as the tension of the battle seemed to fade into the background, something new began to grow between them. Ethan sat at the small table in the control room, working on a set of plans. Lyra was beside him, scanning through data on a screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. Despite everything that had happened, Ethan couldn't help but notice how much calmer they both felt. The danger wasn't gone, but for the first time, they weren't just surviving, they were planning for the future. We need allies, Lyra said suddenly, breaking the silence. She didn't look at Ethan as she spoke, her eyes fixed on the data in front of her. I've been thinking about what you said before. If we're going to take back what's ours, we can't do it alone. Ethan looked up from his work, his gaze thoughtful. You're right. We can't face the cartel by ourselves. But where do we start? Lyra turned to him, her expression serious. There are others out there. There are factions, other families, who have also been harmed by the cartel. Some of them are hiding just like I was. I need to find them, form alliances. Together we'll be stronger. Ethan nodded slowly. He hadn't realized the full scope of what Lyra had lost. She wasn't just fighting for her family's legacy. She was fighting for the freedom of others as well. This was bigger than just the two of them. How do we find them? Ethan asked. I have contacts, Lyra replied, a faint smile crossing her lips. People who owe my family favors, people who can help us get the word out. It won't be easy, but it's our best chance. Ethan leaned back in his chair, thinking he wasn't sure how much help he could be in this mission. But he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let Lyra face this alone. She had come to him for help, and now it was his turn to help her. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to face it with her by his side. We'll do it, he said, his voice steady. We'll find them and we'll build an army, if that's what it takes. Lyra's eyes softened as she looked at him. Thank you, Ethan. I couldn't do this without you. They both sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their decision settling in. It wasn't just about survival anymore. They were about to take a huge step forward, and the road ahead would be dangerous. But for the first time, they were moving toward something, toward a goal, purpose. The days that followed were filled with planning and preparation. Ethan and Lyra spent hours in the control room, sending encrypted messages to Lyra's old contacts. There were risks involved. They had to be careful, make sure they weren't being tracked by the cartel. But Lyra was resourceful, and Ethan was quick to learn how to protect their communications. They worked in tandem, each one relying on the other's strengths. One morning, after a long night of work, Lyra turned to Ethan with a smile. I've heard from one of my contacts, she said. They've agreed to meet us. Ethan stood up from his seat, feeling a surge of excitement. Where? At a neutral location, Lyra said. We'll meet them on the planet Tiberius. It's far from cartel territory, and they won't expect us there. Tiberius was a remote world, known for its rugged terrain and small hidden settlements. It was a place where people went to escape the attention of powerful forces, and it seemed like the perfect place for a meeting like this. When do we leave? Ethan asked. Tonight, Lyra replied. We have to move quickly. If the cartel knows we're making contact with others, they might try to stop us. Ethan nodded. They had no time to waste. He had never been to Tiberius before, but he trusted Lyra's judgment. She had been in this world longer than he had, and she knew how to navigate the dangers they would face. That evening, after finishing their preparations, Ethan and Lyra boarded a small ship that would take them to Tiberius. The ship was simple, just enough to get them from one place to another. As they lifted off from the station, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and nervousness. They were about to take the first step toward something bigger, something more important than either of them had ever imagined. As the ship cruised through the quiet depths of space, Lyra sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. Do you ever wonder what the future holds? Ethan asked, his voice quiet. Lyra turned to him, her expression thoughtful. Every day, she said, but I've learned not to fear it. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Ethan smiled. Together. The journey to Tiberius would be long and the future uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt hope. He wasn't just a technician anymore. He was part of something much bigger. A fight for justice, for freedom. And with Lyra by his side, he was ready for whatever came next.